On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up to a silence so deep it felt like a tomb. My name is Gordon Mitchell. I am 72 years old, and usually my house in Newport echoes with the chaos of 4 grandchildren and a turkey roasting in the oven. But on this specific Thursday, the only thing greeting me was a neon pink sticky note on the marble kitchen island and an empty refrigerator. My son, his wife, and my 4 grandchildren had flown to Hawaii without me. They left me behind like an old piece of furniture they no longer had use for. I did not cry. I did not call them to beg for an explanation. Instead, I poured a cup of black coffee and picked up the phone. 5 days later, I had 45 missed calls and a voicemail from my son that started with sobbing. But before we get to the end, let me tell you how I dismantled their entire lives in less than 24 hours. If you have ever felt taken for granted by the people you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The digital clock on my bedside table read 6:30 in the morning. My internal alarm clock has not failed me in 50 years, a habit from my decades as a logistics director for a global shipping conglomerate. Precision is not just a skill, it is a way of life. I sat up expecting the usual Thanksgiving morning noise. Usually by now, my daughter-in-law Vanessa is already complaining about the temperature of the house, or my son Brandon is yelling at the kids to stop running in the hallway. But today, the silence was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. I put on my robe and walked out of my room on the first floor. This master suite was supposed to be mine, but 3 years ago, when Brandon and Vanessa moved in after his third failed real estate venture, Vanessa insisted they needed the master suite for her mental health. She said the natural light was essential for her career as a lifestyle blogger. I moved to the smaller guest room down the hall without a fight because I thought, that is what fathers do. We sacrifice. I walked down the grand staircase of my Newport estate. I bought this house 20 years ago with the bonuses from restructuring the Atlantic supply chain. It is a solid house. Good bones. But as I walked toward the kitchen, the house felt hollow. I entered the kitchen expecting to see the turkey I had bought sitting on the counter, ready for me to prep. Cooking the bird was my job. Cleaning up was my job. Paying the mortgage was my job. But the counter was bare. The stainless steel appliances gleamed coldly under the morning light. There was no turkey. There were no side dishes. There was just a small neon pink square of paper stuck to the granite island. I walked over and picked it up. I recognized Vanessa's handwriting immediately. It was loopy and childish, written with a glitter pen. Gordon, it read. The boys and I need to heal. This year has been so stressful with your health scares and Brandon's work pressure. We decided to take a last-minute trip to the Maldives for 10 days. We need to reconnect as a couple. The kids are excited for the beach. You can take care of yourself, right? There is chicken in the freezer. See you next week. P.S. Do not touch the vintage wine in the glass cabinet. I need those bottles for a photo shoot when we get back. I read the note twice. I did not feel anger at first. I felt a cold, clinical detachment. It was the same feeling I used to get when a container ship was stranded in the Suez Canal. It was a problem. It required a solution. Emotions were inefficient. They went to the Maldives. That is a 20-hour flight. They did not just decide this last night. This had been planned. They had looked me in the eye yesterday evening while I was polishing the silver for today's dinner and said nothing. I opened the refrigerator. It was almost empty. The shelves where I usually kept my fresh produce, which I bought with my own pension money, were bare. They had cleared it out so the food would not spoil while they were gone. In the door, there was a single carton of milk. I checked the date. It expired 3 days ago. I opened the carton and sniffed. The sour, curdled smell hit my nose. It was a perfect metaphor for my relationship with my son. Spoiled, rotten, past the point of saving. I walked to the sink and poured the chunky white liquid down the drain. I watched it disappear, swirling into the darkness. I rinsed the carton and threw it in the recycling bin. Then I rinsed the sink. I went to the freezer. Buried under a bag of ice, there was a single frost-bitten chicken breast. It looked like a rock. This was my Thanksgiving dinner, a piece of old meat left behind as an afterthought. I closed the freezer door. The soft thud echoed in the empty kitchen. I looked at the glass cabinet in the dining room. Dozens of bottles of expensive wine, some worth thousands of dollars, sat behind the glass. I bought those bottles. I paid for this house. I paid for the electricity that kept the lights on. And yet I was being given orders on a sticky note by a woman who has never paid a utility bill in her life. I went to the coffee maker. I brewed a fresh pot of dark roast. I took my mug and walked to the living room window, looking out at the snow beginning to fall on the manicured lawn. I took a sip. The coffee was hot and bitter. It woke me up. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my bank app. I pulled it out, expecting a utility bill autopay. Chase Sapphire Reserve. Transaction approved. $18,500. The Ritz-Carlton, Maldives, Faroe Islands. I stared at the screen. The numbers glared back at me. $18,000. A memory flashed in my mind. Just last week, my son Brandon had come into my study. He had tears in his eyes. He sat in the leather chair across from my desk, wringing his hands. "Dad," he had said, "I do not know what to do. The private school is threatening to kick little Leo out. I am short on commissions this month. If I do not pay $5,000 by Friday, he loses his spot. You know how sensitive he is. A public school would destroy him." I remembered looking at my son. He was 38 years old, wearing a watch that cost more than my first car, yet he was begging for tuition money. I had sighed, pulled out my checkbook, and written him a check for $5,000. I told myself it was for my grandson. I realized now, standing in my empty living room, that there was no tuition crisis. The $5,000 I gave him was likely used to upgrade their flight seats to business class. And now they were using the credit card I gave them for emergencies to pay for a luxury villa over the water. An emergency card. I had given it to Brandon 5 years ago when his car broke down on the highway. "Keep this for life or death situations," I had told him. Apparently, a vacation to the Maldives was life or death. I unlocked my phone and opened the banking app. I navigated to the credit card section. I saw the pending charge. $18,500, and below it, a charge for $400 at an airport lounge in Dubai, and another for $2,000 for duty-free shopping. They were burning through my money with the speed of a forest fire. I sat down in my leather armchair. The leather was cold. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone. I tapped on the card management tab. I could have reported the card stolen. I could have frozen it completely, but that would have been too simple. That would have alerted them immediately. They would call the bank, maybe even call me, pretending there was a mistake. No. I wanted them to feel the embarrassment. I wanted them to be sitting at a white tablecloth dinner surrounded by wealth and feel the sudden sharp drop of the guillotine. I found the setting for authorized user spending limits. I tapped on Brandon's name. The current limit was set to $50,000. I deleted the number. I typed in a new number. $10. I hit save. The app loaded for a second, then a green check mark appeared. Limit updated. I leaned back. They had already paid for the room, likely upon arrival. That was the $18,000. But they still had to eat. They still had to drink. They still had activities to book. A smile touched my lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a general who just cut off the enemy's supply line. My phone rang. It was Brandon. He must have just landed or arrived at the hotel. The timing was perfect. I looked at his face on the screen. It was a photo from his college graduation back when I still had hope he would take over the logistics firm, back before he met Vanessa. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. I let it ring again. I pressed the volume button on the side of my phone to silence it. I stood up and looked around the living room. Really looked at it. For the last 3 years, I had been living like a guest in my own home. My favorite vintage naval maps had been taken down from the walls, replaced by abstract beige art that Vanessa said was trending. My comfortable recliners had been moved to the basement, replaced by white, uncomfortable Italian sofas that I was not allowed to sit on with my shoes on. The shelves were filled with knickknacks that served no purpose, gold-painted pineapples, stacks of fashion books that no one read, candles that smelled like artificial vanilla. This was not my home anymore. It was a stage set for Vanessa's Instagram life, and I was just the financier the old man kept in the wings to pay the bills. I walked over to the mantel. There was a family photo taken last Christmas. Brandon, Vanessa, and the 4 kids all wearing matching red pajamas. I was not in the photo. I was the one holding the camera. Vanessa had said, "Oh, Gordon, you are not dressed for the aesthetic. Just take the picture." Okay, I had taken the picture. I reached out and took the frame off the mantel. I looked at their smiling faces, false smiles, expensive teeth paid for by my dental plan. I dropped the frame into the metal trash can by the fireplace. The glass shattered with a satisfying crash. I walked to my study. I opened the drawer where I kept my contacts. I flipped through the Rolodex until I found a card I had not looked at in years. Mike's Estate Clearance and Auctions. Mike was a man I used to work with in the shipping yards before he started his own business. He specialized in quick liquidations, foreclosures, divorces, sudden moves. He was fast, discreet, and he did not ask questions. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. "Hello," Mike's voice was gravelly. It was Thanksgiving. He was likely annoyed. "Mike, it is Gordon Mitchell," I said. There was a pause. "Gordon, the Gordon from Pier 42. "The same," I said. "Gordon, it is Thanksgiving morning. Is everything all right?" "No, Mike. Everything is not all right. But I have a job for you, a big one. And I am willing to pay triple the holiday rate if you can get a crew here in 2 hours. Triple Mike sounded interested. "What are we moving?" "Everything," I said. "I want you to clear a 5-bedroom house in Newport. Furniture, electronics, art designer clothes. Everything that is not in my personal study or my guest bedroom. Gordon, are you moving?" "No," I said. "I am remodeling. I want it all gone, Mike. Sell it at auction. Donate it. Burn it. I do not care. I just want this house empty by sunset." There was a silence on the line. Mike was calculating. "I can get 3 trucks and 6 guys there by 10 a.m., Mike said. "But Gordon, are you sure? This sounds drastic." I looked at the pink sticky note still sitting on the counter. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Mike." "Bring the trucks." I hung up the phone. I went upstairs to Brandon and Vanessa's bedroom, the master suite. I pushed open the double doors. The room smelled of Vanessa's expensive perfume. The bed was unmade sheets tangled. Her makeup was scattered across the vanity table I had bought for her birthday last year. I walked to the closet. It was a walk-in closet the size of a small apartment. Rows of designer handbags. Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Hermes. Suits that Brandon wore to play the part of a successful real estate mogul, even though he hadn't sold a house in 6 months. I grabbed a Louis Vuitton bag from the shelf. It felt heavy. I opened it. Inside, stuffed between the silk lining and a dust bag, was a notebook. It was a leather-bound journal. I frowned. Vanessa was not a writer. I opened the book. The handwriting was hers. It was a diary, or rather a ledger. I flipped through the pages. It was a list of expenses, but also notes. Strategy notes. October 12th convinced Gordon to pay for the new landscaping. Told him the trees were a safety hazard. Saved us $4,000. November 3rd, Brandon asked for the tuition money. Gordon bought it hook, line, and sinker. That money is going into the travel fund. My hand tightened on the book. I flipped to the most recent entry dated 2 days ago. November 23rd, Operation Freedom is a go. We leave for Maldives on Thanksgiving. Gordon will be too pathetic to do anything. When we get back, we need to start phase 2. I talked to the contractor about converting the basement. It's damp, but it's enough for him. We need his bedroom for the nursery if we decide to have another one. Plus, if we move him downstairs, we can control his access to the main house. We need to find where he keeps the certificates for the antique bonds. Brandon says they are worth at least $2 million. Once we get power of attorney, we can liquidate them and finally buy the penthouse in Miami. I stared at the words. Convert the basement. Damp. Control his access. They were not just using me. They were planning to imprison me. They were planning to shove me underground like a rat so they could steal the rest of my life's work. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It was heavier than the grief. It was solid. It was fuel. I took my phone out of my pocket. I opened the camera app. I took clear, high-resolution photos of every single page of that notebook. I made sure the dates were visible. I made sure the handwriting was clear. Then I put the notebook back exactly where I found it. I walked out of the closet. I looked at the king-sized bed with its 1,000 thread-count sheets. I stripped the bed. I pulled the sheets off in violent jerks. I threw the pillows on the floor. I went to the bathroom. I saw Brandon's toiletries, his expensive colognes, his beard trimmers. I swept my arm across the counter, knocking everything into the trash bin. The sound of glass breaking was music to my ears. I heard the rumble of heavy engines outside. I walked to the window. 3 large moving trucks were pulling into my driveway. Mike was as good as his word. I went downstairs to open the door. Mike was standing there looking older than I remembered, bundled in a thick coat. He looked past me into the house. "Where do we start, boss?" he asked. I pointed to the living room. "Start with the white sofas," I said. "Then take the 85-inch television. Then clear the dining room. Do not leave a single spoon that isn't sterling silver." Mike nodded to his crew. They marched in like an army of ants. They had dollies and straps and thick blankets. I sat on a folding chair in the hallway, sipping my second cup of coffee, and I watched. I watched them take the sofa Vanessa had screamed at me for touching with my gardening pants. I watched them take the dining table where Brandon had sat and lied to my face about his debts. I watched them carry out boxes of toys that my grandchildren never put away. It was surgical. It was efficient. Around noon, one of the movers came down the stairs carrying a large jewelry box. "This goes too?" he asked. I opened it. It was full of Vanessa's costume jewelry and a few pieces I had given my late wife, which Vanessa had appropriated after she died. I reached in and took out my wife's pearl necklace. I put it in my pocket. "The rest goes," I said. As the house grew emptier, the echo grew louder. But it was not a lonely echo. It was a cleansing one. The ghosts of their greed were being carried out one box at a time. By 3 o'clock, the house was a shell. The floors were bare. The walls were stripped of their beige art. Mike walked up to me, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That is the last of it, Gordon. The trucks are full. We are taking it to the warehouse. We can auction the good stuff next week. I will cut you a check." "Keep the check, Mike," I said. "Consider it a bonus for the holiday work. Donate the rest to the Veterans Association." Mike looked at me stunned. "Gordon, this is a lot of money's worth of stuff." "I do not want the money, Mike. I want the space." Mike nodded slowly. He shook my hand. "You always were a hard man, Gordon. Take care of yourself." They drove away. I stood in the center of my empty living room. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the hardwood floors. It was just me, the silence, and the cold. I walked to the front door. I looked at the smart lock Brandon had installed. He had access on his phone. He could unlock it from anywhere in the world. I picked up my toolbox from the corner. I removed the smart lock. I ripped the wires out. I threw the digital keypad into the bushes. I installed a heavy-duty mechanical deadbolt, a lock that required a physical key, a key that only I possessed. I did the same for the back door and the garage entry. Then I went to the thermostat. Brandon liked the house at 72 degrees. Vanessa liked it at 74. I turned the dial down. 55 degrees, just enough to keep the pipes from freezing. The furnace groaned and shut off. The silence returned deeper than before. I went to my small guest room. I sat on the single bed. I opened my laptop. I logged into the router settings. I saw the list of connected devices. Brandon's iPad, Vanessa's Kindle, the kids' tablets, the smart fridge, the Alexa speakers. I clicked on the settings. Change password. I typed in a new password. A long, complex string of characters that no one would guess. Then I changed the network name. I deleted the Mitchell Manor. I typed in, not Brandon's house anymore. I clicked apply. All the devices in the house that were still plugged in beeped as they lost connection. The house was now a fortress. A cold, analog fortress. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Brandon. "Dad, why is the credit card declined? We are at dinner. This is embarrassing. Fix it. Now." I looked at the message. I could imagine him sweating in his linen shirt, the waiter hovering with the bill, Vanessa looking furious. I did not reply. I put the phone on the nightstand. I went downstairs to the kitchen. I retrieved the bottle of wine I had hidden in the pantry, a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux that I had been saving for a special occasion. Vanessa didn't know about this one. I opened it. I let it breathe. I grabbed the only chair left in the house, my old wooden reading chair, and placed it in front of the cold fireplace. I poured a glass of wine. I took a sip. It tasted like oak and berries and freedom. I opened my phone one last time and checked Vanessa's Instagram. She had posted a story an hour ago, a video of the sunset over the ocean. Finally free, the caption read, "No toxic energy, just us." Blessed. I took another sip of wine. "Enjoy the sunset." "Vanessa," I whispered to the empty room, "because the sun is going down on your entire life." I sat there in the dark, watching the snow fall outside, waiting for the inevitable storm of phone calls to begin. I was cold. I was alone, and for the first time in years, I was completely content. They had 10 days in paradise. I had 10 days to prepare for war. And when they came back, they wouldn't be coming home. They would be walking into a trap. I finished my wine, closed my eyes, and listened to the wind howl against the windows. The house was mine again, and I intended to keep it that way. The silence in the master bedroom was different from the silence downstairs. Downstairs, the silence was empty, a void left by furniture that had been hauled away. Upstairs, in the room that used to be mine before I surrendered it to them, the silence felt heavy, suffocating, like the air in a room where a crime had been committed. The movers had cleared out the designer clothes and the handbags, leaving the closet doors gaping open, like hungry mouths. I stood in the center of the room, looking at the king-sized bed they had left behind, because the frame was too heavy to move on short notice. The sheets were stripped, revealing the mattress stains, a stark reminder of the intimacy of the people who had been plotting my demise while sleeping under my roof. I walked over to the nightstand on Vanessa's side of the bed. I don't know what compelled me to look there. Perhaps it was decades of working in logistics, the instinct to check every corner to ensure the manifest matches the cargo. Or perhaps it was just a father's intuition, a deep gnawing sense that the disrespect I had seen was only the tip of the iceberg. I opened the drawer. It was empty save for a few bobby pins and a stray receipt for a spray tan. I closed it. I looked at the pillows. They had left the expensive memory foam pillows I had bought them for Christmas last year. I lifted one of the pillows, intending to strip the case, and there it was. A notebook. It wasn't a digital tablet or a phone. It was a physical, leather-bound notebook, dyed a soft, innocent pastel pink with the words, "My Manifestation Journal," embossed in gold on the cover. I knew Vanessa believed in the power of the universe in writing things down to make them real. I had always dismissed it as harmless nonsense, the hobby of a woman with too much time and not enough responsibility. I picked it up. The leather felt cold and smooth against my calloused fingertips. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. The springs creaked, a sound of protest in the quiet room. I opened the book. I expected to find lists of shoes she wanted to buy, or perhaps affirmations about her beauty and popularity. I was wrong. The first page was dated 6 months ago. It was titled, "The 5-Year Plan." I began to read. Year 1, she wrote in her looping, bubbly handwriting. Maintain the status quo. Keep Gordon happy but distant. Ensure he pays for the new roof and the landscaping. Start planting seeds about his memory loss. Make him doubt small things. Where he put his keys. If he turned off the stove. My hand tightened on the cover. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I remembered the incident last month with the stove. I had sworn I turned it off, but Vanessa had come running in screaming that I was trying to burn the house down. I had apologized for days. I had felt so old, so useless. Now reading these words, I realized the gas dial hadn't been left on by accident. She had turned it on after I left the room. I turned the page. Year 2. The transition. We need the space. The master suite is great, but we need a nursery if we decide to have another baby, or just a guest room for my friends. Gordon takes up too much room. The basement is finished enough. If we move his things down there gradually, he won't notice until it's done. We can put a lock on the door at the top of the stairs for his safety. He wanders at night. We can't have him waking the kids. I stopped reading. I looked up at the ceiling trying to breathe. The basement. My basement. It was a concrete box. It was damp. It smelled of mildew and old paint. There were no windows. It was a place for storage boxes and broken tools, not for a human being, not for a father. Not for the man who paid the mortgage on this very house. For his safety. The phrase made bile rise in my throat. They weren't planning to care for me. They were planning to cage me. They wanted to lock me underground like a shameful secret, like a rabid animal, so they could play house upstairs without the inconvenience of my presence. I forced my eyes back to the page. I had to know. I had to see the bottom of this pit. Phase 3. Liquidation. This entry was dated just 3 weeks ago. Brandon says the old man has a collection of vintage watches in the safety deposit box. Patek Philippe, Rolex, Vacheron. He thinks they are worth at least $400,000, maybe more. Gordon never wears them. He just keeps them like a dragon hoarding gold. We need power of attorney. If we can get Dr. Evans to sign off on a dementia diagnosis, we can access the box. We can sell the watches. That money is the down payment for the penthouse in Miami. We deserve that view. We deserve to be free of this gloomy old house and this gloomy old man. I felt a physical blow to my chest. My watches. My collection. I started collecting them 40 years ago. Each watch marked a milestone. The Rolex I bought when I made director. The Patek I bought when my late wife Sarah beat cancer the first time. They weren't just assets. They were my history. They were my memories. And to Vanessa, to my own son, they were just a ticket to a penthouse in Miami. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, my freedom, and my history and convert it all into a backdrop for her social media photos. I turned to the last entry. It was dated the night before they left. The ink was still fresh. Leaving for the Maldives tomorrow. Finally. 10 days of peace, and when we get back, we start the process. I talked to Brandon. He agreed. It's time to be ruthless. Gordon is holding us back. He's lived his life. It's our turn. If he resists the basement, we increase the medication. I looked it up online. A higher dose of his blood pressure meds will make him dizzy, confused. It will prove he can't live alone upstairs. It's for the best. Operation Freedom is a go. The book fell from my hands onto the floor. It landed with a soft thud, but in my mind, it sounded like a gavel striking a judge's bench. Increase the medication. They weren't just thieves. They weren't just ungrateful. They were willing to poison me. They were willing to chemically lobotomize me to get what they wanted. I sat there for a long time. The winter sun moved across the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not from fear, not anymore. They were shaking from a rage so cold, so absolute, that it felt like I had swallowed a block of ice. I thought about Brandon. I thought about the boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I sat up with when he had fevers. The boy I paid to put through college, then grad school, then bailed out of debt time and time again. I realized then that the boy was dead. He had been consumed by the weak, greedy man he had become. And Vanessa, she was not family. She was a parasite. A predator who had walked into my home with a smile and a knife behind her back. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt every year of my age, but I also felt something else. I felt a surge of adrenaline, sharp and clear. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the camera app. I verified the settings. High resolution, flash on. I picked up the pink notebook. I placed it on the nightstand under the direct light of the lamp. I opened it to the first page. Snap. I made sure the date was visible. I made sure every loop of her handwriting was crisp. I turned the page. Snap. The entry about the basement. I took 3 photos of that one from different angles. Snap. The entry about the watches. Snap. The entry about the medication. I photographed every single page. I photographed the cover. I photographed the inside cover where she had written her name and phone number in case it was lost. I didn't stop there. I went to the cloud storage on my phone. I created a new folder. I named it Evidence. I uploaded every photo. Then I emailed the photos to myself. Then I emailed them to my old encrypted work email that I hadn't used in years just to be safe. I looked at the notebook one last time. I wanted to burn it. I wanted to tear it into confetti and flush it down the toilet. I wanted to destroy the physical manifestation of their hatred. But the logistician in me took over. If I destroyed it, they would know I knew. They would panic. They would change their plans. They would cover their tracks. No. I needed them to walk into the trap. I needed them to come back from their vacation tan and relaxed, thinking they were returning to a helpless old victim. I carefully smoothed the pages. I closed the book. I placed it back exactly where I found it, under the pillow on the left side of the bed. I fluffed the pillow so it looked undisturbed. I stood back and looked at the room. It looked exactly as it had 10 minutes ago. But everything had changed. The air in the room felt different. The house was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. And I had just captured the enemy's battle plans. I walked out of the master bedroom and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently with a click that sounded like the cocking of a gun. I went down the stairs. I didn't hold the railing. I walked with a new purpose. The disappointment I had felt earlier that morning, the sadness of being left alone on Thanksgiving, it was all gone. It had evaporated, replaced by a disgust so profound, it made my vision clear. I went to the kitchen. I looked at the empty counter where the pink sticky notes still sat. "Don't touch the vintage wine," she had written. I walked to the glass cabinet in the dining room. I opened it. I took out a bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux. It was worth more than their car payments. I didn't open it to drink it. Not yet. I placed it on the counter. Then I went to my study. I sat down at my heavy oak desk. I opened my laptop. I wasn't just going to change the locks. That was child's play. I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece. I was going to ensure that when they returned, they wouldn't just be locked out of a house. They would be locked out of their future. I pulled up the contact information for my lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. It was a holiday, but Blackwood was the kind of man who billed by the minute and never slept. I typed a subject line, "Urgent, estate planning update." Then I deleted it. I typed a new subject line, "The eviction of Brandon and Vanessa Mitchell." I started typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I detailed the notebook. I detailed the credit card charges. I detailed the neglect. I hit send. Then I picked up the phone again. I had one more call to make. A call to the local security company. I needed cameras. I needed sensors. I needed to turn this house into a fortress that would record their faces when they realized their Operation Freedom had just become their prison sentence. I leaned back in my chair. The house was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt the warmth of the fire burning inside me. They wanted to play games with my life, fine. I had been managing supply chains and negotiating with union bosses since before Vanessa was born. They thought I was a senile old man. They were about to find out I was the CEO of their destruction. The locksmith arrived exactly 45 minutes after I called. His name was Dave, a man with grease in his fingernails and a tool belt that jingled like sleigh bells as he walked up the driveway. It was Thanksgiving afternoon, and the rate was quadruple the standard fee, but I did not blink when he quoted the price. I would have paid 10 times that amount to hear the sound of those smart locks being ripped out of my door frames. Brandon had installed them 2 years ago, claiming they were safer, more convenient. What he really meant was that he wanted to be able to let his friends in without getting off the couch, and he wanted to monitor when I came and went. I watched Dave work. He didn't ask questions about why the house was empty or why an old man was standing in a heavy wool coat in his own hallway. He just drilled. The screech of the metal bit biting into the wood was aggressive and necessary. I told him to remove everything digital. No keypads, no fingerprint scanners, no Wi-Fi bridges. I wanted steel. I wanted deadbolts with keys that could not be copied at a hardware store kiosk. I wanted the kind of security that required intent to bypass. When he handed me the new keys, they were heavy and cold in my palm. There were 3 of them. One for the front door, one for the back, and one for the garage. There were no spares. I put them in my pocket and felt their weight against my thigh. It was the weight of authority returning to where it belonged. I walked Dave to his truck, shook his hand, and locked the front door behind me. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It was the sound of a drawbridge raising. The castle was sealed. I turned back to the empty foyer. The sun had gone down while Dave was working, and the house was beginning to dim. Shadows stretched across the bare hardwood floors where the Persian rug used to be. The silence was absolute. Without the hum of the refrigerator being opened every 10 minutes by a hungry grandchild, without the drone of the television, the house felt enormous. It felt like the warehouse at the shipping yard after the final container had been loaded. I walked to the thermostat in the hallway. It was one of those sleek glass discs that glowed orange when you walked past it. Vanessa kept it set to 74 degrees day and night. She liked to wear thin silk loungewear in the winter and complained that anything lower gave her dry skin. I looked at the digital readout. 74. It was tropical. It was wasteful. It was expensive. I reached out and gripped the dial. I turned it to the left. The numbers counted down. 70. 65. 60. 55. I stopped at 50. The system paused as if confused by the command. Then I heard the furnace in the basement shudder and silence itself. The gentle hum of forced air that had been a constant background noise in my life for years simply vanished. I stood there for a moment waiting. It didn't take long. The draft from the old windows, which I had offered to replace before Brandon insisted the money go to landscaping, began to creep in. The air grew crisp. The floorboards cooled. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself. This was not just about saving money on the heating bill. This was environmental warfare. When they returned expecting the warm embrace of a home they treated like a hotel, they would be greeted by the biting chill of reality. They would have to keep their coats on. They would see their breath in the air. They would feel the cold seeping into their bones, a physical manifestation of the welcome they were about to receive. I continued my patrol. I went to the utility closet where the modem and router blinked in the darkness. Blue and green lights pulsed in a rhythmic dance. This was the nerve center of their digital lives. Vanessa lived on the internet. Her self-worth was measured in likes and shares. Brandon managed his fantasy football leagues and pretended to work from his iPad. The children were glued to streaming services from the moment they woke up. I sat down on the floor with my laptop. I connected to the admin port. I could see the traffic logs. Even from Hawaii, devices were trying to ping the home server. Smart cameras. The refrigerator trying to order filters. The digital picture frames waiting for new uploads. I navigated to the security settings. I wiped the configuration. I reset the encryption key to a 24-character string of random alphanumeric gibberish that I had written down on a piece of paper in my pocket. Then I changed the network visibility to hidden. Finally, I changed the network name. I typed it out slowly, savoring every keystroke. Access denied. I hit apply. The router blinked red for a second, rebooting, severing every connection to the outside world. When the lights turned green again, they were steady, calm. The house was now a black hole. No data in, no data out. If they wanted to connect, they would have to talk to me. If they wanted to unlock a door, they would have to knock. I stood up, my knees cracking in the cold air. It was done. The physical barriers were in place. The digital walls were erected. The environment was hostile. I walked to the kitchen. It was dark now, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the blinds I had drawn shut. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I didn't want the warmth of the bulbs. I wanted the darkness. I wanted to acclimate to the environment I had created. I found the bottle of 1982 Bordeaux on the counter where I had left it. I found a single crystal glass that I had saved from the movers hidden in the back of a cabinet. I poured the wine. The liquid was dark, almost black in the gloom. I carried the glass and the bottle to the living room. I pulled my old wooden reading chair closer to the window facing the street. I sat down. The wood was hard and cold. It offered no comfort, only support. That was all I needed. I took a sip of the wine. It was complex, earthy, with notes of leather and tobacco. It was a wine meant to be savored in silence, not guzzled at a chaotic dinner table while listening to complaints about the turkey being too dry. I drank it slowly, letting the warmth of the alcohol combat the chill in the room. Outside, the snow was falling harder, blanketing the driveway in white. It was beautiful and desolate. I checked my watch. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. In the Maldives, it was morning. They were probably waking up in their overwater bungalow hungover from champagne, reaching for their phones to check their social media feeds only to find their credit cards declined and their messages failing to send. They would be confused at first, then annoyed, then panic would set in. I imagined the scene. Brandon yelling at the concierge. Vanessa crying because she couldn't post her sunrise yoga video. The kids complaining that they couldn't order room service. I took another sip of wine and smiled. It was a cold smile reflected in the dark window pane. I was not a vindictive man by nature. I had spent my life building solving problems. But when you find rot in the foundation of a building, you don't paint over it. You don't ignore it. You tear it out. You expose the structure to the elements. You strip it down to the studs. That is what I was doing. I was stripping my life down to the studs. I sat there for hours as the house temperature dropped. 48 degrees. 45 degrees. I could see my breath in the moonlight. My fingers were numb around the wine glass, but my mind was razor sharp. I was a sentry in my own tower. I was waiting for the enemy to retreat from their failed campaign and return to the gates only to find them barred. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was an email notification. My lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. Subject: filings prepared. Body: Gordon. I have drafted the eviction notices and the civil suit for misappropriation of funds. The evidence from the notebook is damning. I also contacted the forensic accountant. We will trace every penny. Do you want me to serve them at the airport when they land? I typed a reply with one thumb. No. Let them come to the house first. Let them try the door. I hit send. I finished the glass of wine. I placed the empty glass on the floor. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared out into the snow. The cold was biting now, a physical presence in the room. But it felt clean. It felt honest. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I just listened to the wind howling around the eaves of my fortress, counting down the hours until the war truly began. 8,000 miles away from the freezing coastline of Newport, the sun was setting over the Indian Ocean in a blaze of purple and gold. The air at the Ritz-Carlton Maldives was thick with the scent of jasmine and salt water, a humid embrace that felt like money itself. In Villa 42, the largest overwater bungalow on the pier, Vanessa was busy curating her reality. She stood on the edge of the infinity pool, her back arched, holding a glass of champagne that cost $60 a glass. She was recording a story for her 20,000 followers, most of whom were bots she had paid for with my credit card. She tilted her phone, finding the perfect angle where the light hit her diamond earrings. Just another night in paradise, she cooed into the camera, her voice dripping with a fake, cultivated calmness. So grateful for this abundance. Manifesting freedom really works, you guys. We left the toxic energy back in Rhode Island, and the universe rewarded us. She stopped recording, and her smile vanished instantly. She snapped her fingers at Brandon, who was sitting at the outdoor dining table looking at the menu with a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Did you order the lobster thermidor?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I need it for the flat lay photo. The lighting is going to die in 10 minutes. Brandon nodded, wiping his brow with a linen napkin. "Yes, babe. I ordered the lobster, and the Wagyu strip loin, and another bottle of Dom." He looked nervous. He always looked nervous when he wasn't spending cash, but he pushed the feeling down. He told himself it was fine. The old man, my father, was probably asleep in his chair back home eating a sandwich. He wouldn't check the statements until the end of the month. By then, Brandon figured he would have closed a deal, or maybe he could guilt-trip me into covering it as a Christmas gift. It was a strategy that had worked for a decade. Kick the can down the road. Ignore the problem until it goes away or until Gordon fixes it. The waiter arrived, gliding across the teak deck with the silent efficiency of someone trained to serve royalty. He placed the silver platter on the table. The lobster was massive, bright red, garnished with gold leaf. The steak sizzled on a hot stone. The champagne bottle was sweating in its silver bucket. It was a meal that cost more than my first car. Vanessa spent the next 5 minutes arranging the plates, moving the candle, and instructing Brandon to hold his fork just so. She took 30 photos. She didn't take a single bite. Finally satisfied, she sat down and picked up her phone to edit the filters. Brandon ate quickly, shoving the expensive meat into his mouth as if he were afraid someone would take it away. He drank the champagne like it was water. He was trying to drown the little voice in the back of his head that said they shouldn't be here. The bill arrived just as the stars were coming out. The waiter placed the black leather folder on the table with a polite bow. Brandon reached for it with a practiced nonchalance. He didn't even look at the total. He knew it was astronomical. He pulled out the heavy metal Chase Sapphire Reserve card, the authorized user card linked to my primary account. The card that had been his magic wand for 5 years. He slipped it into the folder and handed it back. "Keep it open," he said, trying to sound like a high roller. "We might order dessert." The waiter nodded and retreated into the shadows of the villa. Vanessa was scrolling through comments. "Look," she said. "Sarah from the yoga studio is so jealous. She posted a heart emoji, but I know she hates me." "This is perfect." Brandon smiled weakly. "Yeah. Perfect." 10 minutes passed. The rhythmic sound of the waves lapping against the stilts of the villa was soothing, hypnotic. Brandon poured the last of the champagne. Then the footsteps returned. It wasn't just the waiter this time. Behind him walked a man in a white suit. The shift manager. Brandon's stomach dropped. He knew that walk. It was the walk of bad news. The manager stopped at the table. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was apologetic, but firm. The kind of look you give to a child who has misbehaved in a museum. "Mr. Mitchell," the manager said softly. "Yes," Brandon's voice squeaked. "I am afraid there is an issue with the payment method provided." Vanessa looked up from her phone, annoyed. "What issue? It's a reserve card. It has a $50,000 limit." "Run it again." "We have attempted the transaction 3 times, madam," the manager said, turning to her. "The issuer has declined the charge. The code indicates the limit has been exceeded." "Exceeded." Brandon stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the wood. "That's impossible. We just got here. We haven't spent that much." The manager opened the folder. "The current bill for the room deposit, the transfer boat, and this dinner is $21,000, sir." The card was declined for the full amount. "Try it for just the dinner," Brandon stammered. "Maybe the fraud protection kicked in." "Just run the dinner, $500. "We did, sir. The card was declined for $500. We tried $100. It was declined." The silence that fell over the table was heavier than the humid air. Vanessa looked at Brandon, her eyes narrowing. "Brandon, fix this," she hissed. "This is embarrassing. Call your father." I have my other card," Brandon said, fumbling for his wallet. He pulled out his personal debit card, the one connected to his checking account that had been overdrawn since Tuesday. He knew it wouldn't work, but he handed it over anyway, praying for a miracle. The manager took it. He walked to the portable machine the waiter was holding. He inserted the chip. They all watched the screen. Processing. Processing. Declined. Insufficient funds. The manager sighed. He looked at Brandon with a new expression. The deference was gone. In its place was the cold, hard look of a business protecting its assets. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell," the manager said, his voice dropping an octave. "We require a valid form of payment immediately. If you cannot provide one, we will be forced to involve the local authorities and lock the suite. You will not be permitted to leave the island." Authorities. Police. In a foreign country. Vanessa stood up. She grabbed Brandon's arm, her nails digging into his bicep. Call him, now. Wake him up. I don't care what time it is. Tell him to unfreeze the card. Tell him it's an emergency. Tell him the kids are sick. Anything. Brandon pulled his phone out. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it into the lobster bisque. He unlocked the screen. He saw the time. It was evening in Rhode Island. I would be awake. He dialed the number. He put the phone to his ear. He paced the deck, turning his back to the manager, who was watching him like a hawk. Ring. Ring, ring. Come on, pick up, you old miser, Brandon whispered frantically. On the other side of the world, in a dark, cold living room, I watched my phone light up on the table next to my wine glass. Brandon calling. I let it ring 3 times. I took a sip of wine. I looked at the snow falling outside. Then I reached out and tapped the green button. I didn't say hello, I didn't say anything. I just placed the phone on the wooden armrest of my chair and sat back. Dad, Dad. Brandon's voice was tinny and frantic, spilling out of the speaker into the silent room. I listened. Dad, are you there? Look, something is wrong with the card. We are at dinner. They are threatening to call the cops, Dad. It's embarrassing. You need to call the bank, right now. Tell them to lift the hold. I said nothing. I breathed slowly, rhythmically. Dad, did you hear me? It's $18,000. Just to prove it. I'll pay you back. I swear. I have a commission coming in next week. Just fix it. I picked up the wine glass and swirled it gently. The liquid sloshed against the crystal. The sound was soft, but in the silence of my fortress, it was audible. Did you hear that? Brandon screamed. Are you drinking, Dad? Stop playing games, Vanessa is crying. The kids are scared. We are stranded. I leaned forward toward the phone. I didn't speak. I just exhaled a long, deep breath, letting him hear the life he was trying to extinguish. Why aren't you saying anything? Brandon's voice cracked. He was starting to panic. The arrogance was melting away, replaced by the terror of a child who realizes the safety net is gone. Dad, please. I don't have any other money. We can't pay. I looked at the phone one last time. I pictured him standing on that deck, sweating in his linen suit, the lobster growing cold, the manager tapping his foot. I pictured Vanessa realizing that her manifestation journal hadn't manifested a credit limit. I reached out with my index finger. I hovered over the red button. Gordon Brandon screamed, "Don't you dare hang up! Don't you dare tap!" The line went dead. I didn't block the number. Not yet. I wanted to see them try again. I wanted to see the notifications pile up. Back in the Maldives, Brandon stared at his phone in disbelief. The screen had gone black. The call ended. He turned around. Vanessa was looking at him, her face pale beneath her tan. The manager stepped forward. Well, sir, the signal cut out. Brandon lied, his voice trembling. He is calling the bank now. It will just take a minute. The manager didn't blink. I am afraid we cannot wait a minute, Mr. Mitchell. You have consumed services you cannot pay for. Please come with me to the front desk. Security will escort your wife to the room to pack your belongings. You will be checking out. Checking out? Vanessa shrieked. Where are we supposed to go? It's night. There is a holding area at the main ferry terminal on the capital island, the manager said coldly. You can wait there until you secure funds for a flight home. Security guards appeared from the shadows. They weren't the smiling staff members from the brochure. These were large, serious men. Brandon looked at his phone again. He dialed my number. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. He looked at the lobster he hadn't eaten. He looked at the champagne. He looked at his wife, whose face was twisting into a mask of pure hatred, not for me but for him. "You useless idiot," she hissed. "You said he would pay. You said he always pays. He didn't pay." Brandon whispered, the reality finally crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He hung up on me. The guards stepped forward. One of them took Brandon by the elbow. It wasn't a gentle touch. "Sir, this way." As they were marched off the deck of the luxury villa, leaving the unfinished meal behind, Brandon looked back at the phone in his hand. It was a brick, a useless piece of glass and metal. For the first time in his life, Brandon Mitchell was completely, utterly alone. And as the humidity of the tropical night pressed against his skin, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the chill of the long, cold shadow I had cast from 8,000 miles away. The next 5 days were a study in duality, two worlds separated by 8,000 miles and a lifetime of choices, existing in perfect poetic opposition. While I sat in my armchair watching the snow drift against the window panes of my silent fortress, my son and his wife were living a reality that I can only describe as a masterclass in consequences. I didn't need a spy satellite to know what was happening. I knew the logistics of travel. I knew the geography of the Maldives. And I knew the fragility of my son's ego. It started with the ferry ride. After the security guards escorted them off the property of the Ritz-Carlton, they were put on the staff boat. Not the luxury yacht with champagne and cold towels that brought them there. No, this was the diesel-chugging supply vessel that hauled trash off the island and brought produce in. I imagined Vanessa still in her silk dinner dress, clutching her Birkin bag, as the boat rocked violently in the dark chop of the Indian Ocean, the smell of diesel fumes replacing the scent of jasmine. They were dumped at the ferry terminal in Male, the capital. It is not a resort. It is a concrete jungle, hot, crowded, and loud. They had no reservation. They had no working credit cards. They had the $400 in cash that Brandon kept in his wallet for tips. That was it. While they were likely arguing on a humid sidewalk trying to find a budget hotel that would take cash, I was in my kitchen. I had found a cast iron skillet in the basement that the movers had missed. I placed it on the stove. I unwrapped a Wagyu ribeye steak I had bought from the local butcher. I seasoned it simply with coarse salt and cracked black pepper. The house was cold, hovering around 55 degrees, but the heat from the stove felt good. I seared the steak. The sound of the meat sizzling was the only noise in the house. No screaming children. No Vanessa complaining that the smell of meat was making her nauseous. Just the pure, honest chemistry of cooking. I ate at the kitchen counter standing up. The steak was perfect. Melts in your mouth, tender. I washed it down with the rest of the Bordeaux. I slept that night in the guest room bed under 3 wool blankets, and I didn't wake up once. Day 2. In Male, the reality of their situation had set in. They couldn't afford a hotel for 10 days. They couldn't even afford a direct flight home for 6 people. Last-minute tickets for a family of 6, one way from the Maldives to Rhode Island, cost thousands. They had hundreds. They ended up at the airport terminal. I know this because the notifications on my phone started to change. They weren't just missed calls anymore. They were alerts from airlines. Brandon was trying to book tickets using his frequent flyer miles, but he didn't have enough for everyone. I pictured them in the departures hall. Metal benches with thin vinyl padding. The air conditioning in those places is never enough to combat the tropical humidity. Vanessa would be sweating. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, would be frizzy and limp. The kids would be bored, hungry, and loud. They probably ate from the vending machines. Bags of chips, sodas, maybe a sandwich wrapped in plastic that tasted like cardboard. Back in Newport, I spent the day reading. I went to the library, the public one, not the one in my house that was now empty shelves, and checked out a stack of naval history books. I sat in my wooden chair by the window, wrapped in a quilt, and read about the Battle of Trafalgar. Nelson held the line. He maintained discipline. He won. I made a pot of tea. I watched the neighbors walking their dogs. They looked at my house, probably wondering why the driveway wasn't plowed, why the holiday lights weren't up. Let them wonder. Privacy was a luxury I had reclaimed. Day 3. The phone calls escalated. I kept my phone on silent face down on the table, but I checked it periodically, like a scientist checking a petri dish. 45 missed calls. The voicemails were a fascinating psychological study. The first 10 were angry. Brandon screaming, "Dad, pick up, this isn't funny, we are stuck at the airport. The kids are sleeping on the floor, you can't do this." The next 10 were bargaining. "Dad, look, I am sorry about the credit card limit. I should have asked. Just transfer us $2,000. We found a flight with 3 layovers. We just need to pay the taxes and fees. Please, I will pay you back double." I listened to that one while drinking a glass of scotch. Pay me back double. He couldn't even pay me back for the coffee he bought at the terminal. Then came the tears. Vanessa left a voicemail. It was the first time she had ever called me directly. Usually she communicated through Brandon or sticky notes. "Gordon," she sobbed. Her voice was thick, likely from exhaustion and dehydration. "Please, I am sorry about the note. I am sorry about the basement. We were stressed. We didn't mean it. Please, Gordon. Leo has a fever. We are running out of diapers for the baby. We are sleeping on the floor near the baggage claim. People are staring at us. Please just help us get home." I saved that voicemail. I didn't save it because I enjoyed her pain. I saved it as evidence. Evidence that when stripped of her arrogance and her spending power, she was just as desperate and manipulative as I suspected. She used the children as shields. Leo has a fever. If Leo had a fever, she should have taken him to a clinic, not dragged him to a luxury resort on a stolen credit card. I deleted the rest without listening. I made a sandwich for lunch. Ham and Swiss on rye. I ate it slowly. I cleaned the crumbs off the counter. I wiped down the sink. The house was staying clean. It stayed orderly. There were no toys to trip over, no piles of laundry on the stairs. It was a machine running at peak efficiency. Day 4. They must have found a way. Maybe Brandon sold his watch. It was a Rolex Submariner I bought him when he graduated business school. He probably got pennies on the dollar for it at a pawn shop in mail, but it would have been enough for the cheapest, most miserable tickets available. I got an email notification from the airline. Itinerary change. Mail to Sri Lanka. 8-hour layover. Sri Lanka to Doha. 6-hour layover. Doha to JFK. 14 hours. JFK to Providence. Economy class. Middle seats. Back of the plane. It was a brutal itinerary. It was the kind of travel schedule you endure when you are a backpacker in your 20s, not a family of 6 accustomed to private transfers and lie-flat seats. I imagined Brandon, 6'2", crammed into an economy seat for 14 hours, his knees pressing into the tray table, a screaming toddler on his lap, because they couldn't afford a separate seat for the baby. I imagined Vanessa unable to recline, surrounded by strangers, her vacation glow fading into a gray pallor of exhaustion. I went to the basement, not to live, but to inspect. I looked at the damp concrete walls. I looked at the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I looked at the corner where they had planned to put my cot. It smelled of mold. It was cold. I walked back upstairs and locked the basement door. I put the key on my keyring. I prepared a roast for dinner. Potatoes, carrots, onions. The smell filled the kitchen, a warm, savory scent that usually signifies family and gathering. But tonight, it signified survival. I ate alone, listening to the wind rattle the window frames. Day 5. Tuesday. They were in the air. The long haul. I spent the day making final preparations. I checked the cameras I had installed. The feeds were crisp and clear on my laptop screen. Camera 1 covered the driveway. Camera 2 covered the front porch. Camera 3 covered the backyard. I could see everything. I checked the locks again. Solid. I checked the heating system. Still holding steady at 55 degrees. The house felt like a refrigerator, preserving everything exactly as it was. I sat in the living room as the sun began to fade. The snow had stopped, leaving a frozen, crusty layer of white over everything. The world looked hard and unforgiving. My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Landed at JFK. Missed connection to Providence. Taking a cab. Be there in 3 hours. Unlock the door. We are freezing and starving. I looked at the timestamp. 7 p.m. They would be here by 10. I didn't reply. I didn't unlock the door. Instead, I went to the kitchen and poured one last glass of wine. I turned off the single lamp I had left on. I sat in the darkness facing the front door, the blue light of the security monitor glowing softly on my lap. I was not afraid. I was not nervous. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind of calm a captain feels when he steers his ship into the storm, knowing the hull will hold. They were coming back to a house that was no longer theirs. They were coming back to a father who was no longer the man they knew. They were coming back expecting a warm bed and a hot meal and an apology. What they were going to get was the cold, hard truth. I watched the screen. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. I waited. And then at 10:15 p.m. headlights cut through the darkness on the monitor. A yellow taxi van pulled up to the curb. It looked battered, covered in road salt. The side door slid open. Brandon stepped out. He looked like a ghost. His clothes were wrinkled and stained. He wasn't wearing a coat, just his linen vacation jacket. He shivered violently as the Rhode Island wind hit him. Vanessa followed, carrying the baby. She looked broken. Her hair was a mess. She was wearing sandals in the snow. They dragged their luggage out of the trunk. The driver didn't help them. He just waited for his money. Brandon handed him a wad of crumpled bills. The taxi drove away, leaving them standing on the sidewalk in the dark. They looked up at the house. It was completely dark. No porch light. No warm glow from the windows. It looked abandoned. They walked up the driveway, slipping on the ice I hadn't salted. They reached the front porch. I watched on the screen as Brandon reached for the door handle. He pressed his thumb against the fingerprint scanner that was no longer there. He paused, confused. He looked at the hole in the wood, where the smart lock used to be, now filled by a shiny steel deadbolt cylinder. He tried the handle. Locked. He pounded on the door. "Dad! Dad! Open up, it's us!" I took a sip of wine. I didn't move. Vanessa pushed past him. She banged on the glass with the flat of her hand. "Gordon, open this door right now. My children are freezing." I sat in the dark, watching their breath plume in the freezing air on the black and white monitor. I watched them realize that the key code didn't work. I watched them realize that the house was dark, not because I was asleep, but because I was gone. Or so they thought. But I wasn't gone. I was right there on the other side of the wall, separated by 3 inches of oak and a lifetime of disappointment. "Let them knock," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them knock until their hands bleed." The war had arrived at my doorstep, and I was ready to open fire. The taillights of the yellow taxi van were the last warm thing my son and his family saw that night. As the vehicle skidded slightly on the unplowed asphalt and disappeared around the bend of the cul-de-sac, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the driveway. It was the kind of silence that only exists in deep winter, where the snow absorbs sound and the air is too cold to carry an echo. I sat in my darkened living room, the blue glow of the security monitor, painting my face in ghostly hues, watching them stand there. They looked like castaways washed up on a frozen shore. Brandon stood in the center of the driveway, his linen vacation jacket flapping uselessly in the biting Rhode Island wind. He was staring at the space where the taxi had been, as if willing it to return, as if he couldn't quite comprehend that he had been left behind. Beside him, Vanessa was shivering violently. She was wearing a thin, strappy sundress with a cashmere wrap that might have been sufficient for a breezy evening in the Maldives, but was laughably inadequate for a nor'easter in Newport. She clutched the baby to her chest, trying to shield him from the wind, while the other 3 children huddled together, their tans looking gray and sickly under the moonlight. They were motionless for a long moment, paralyzed by the thermal shock. I took a sip of my wine. I felt the liquid warm my throat. I wondered if they could feel the cold seeping into their bones yet, or if the adrenaline was still keeping them warm. I knew from experience that the adrenaline would fade quickly. The cold would win. The cold always wins. Brandon turned toward the house. I saw him squint, looking for the porch light that was usually set to a timer. It was dark. The landscaping lights I had paid $4,000 for last month were dark. The house loomed over them, a massive black silhouette against the gray sky. "Let's go!" Brandon shouted over the wind. His voice was muffled by the glass, but the high-definition audio on the exterior cameras picked it up clearly. "Get inside, it's freezing." They scrambled up the walkway. I had not salted it. I had not shoveled it. Ice had formed a treacherous, invisible layer beneath the fresh dusting of snow. Vanessa slipped her sandals, finding no purchase. She went down on one knee with a cry of pain, barely keeping the baby from hitting the ground. Brandon didn't stop to help her. He didn't even look back. He was focused entirely on the door. Survival instinct had kicked in, and chivalry was the first casualty. He reached the porch and lunged for the door handle. I leaned forward in my chair, watching his thumb extend automatically. He was reaching for the biometric scanner. For 3 years, he had entered this house with a casual press of his thumb, a gesture of ownership that he had never earned. His thumb pressed against cold, smooth steel. He pulled his hand back, confused. He looked at the doorframe. He patted the wood, his eyes widening. The sleek black glass panel of the smart lock was gone. The keypad was gone. In its place was a heavy-duty brass deadbolt cylinder, the kind that looks like a bullet casing. He grabbed the handle and twisted it. It didn't budge. He threw his shoulder against the wood. The door held firm. It was solid oak reinforced with a steel core. I had bought it for security against intruders. I never imagined the intruders would be my own kin. "What is going on?" Vanessa screamed from the bottom of the steps. She was limping now, dragging the 2 middle children by their hands. "Open the door." "Brandon, it's gone," Brandon stammered. He looked at the lock again. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and tapped the screen frantically. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to open the smart home app. He was trying to unlock the door remotely. I checked my laptop. The network logs showed a device trying to connect. Connection refused. Access denied. "It's not working," Brandon yelled, panic rising in his voice. "The app isn't connecting. The lock is changed. Dad must have changed it." "Use the code," Vanessa yelled. "Use the emergency code." "There is no keypad," Brandon shouted back. "There is nowhere to type the code, Vanessa. It's a key lock, a metal key lock." He turned and ran to the garage. I switched the camera feed to the driveway view. He punched the code into the keypad on the garage frame. I had disabled that 2 days ago. He punched it again and again. He hit the keypad with his fist. Nothing. He ran back to the front door. He was breathing hard now, clouds of white vapor exploding from his mouth. He looked at the windows. The living room curtains were drawn, but there was a small gap. He pressed his face against the glass, shielding his eyes from the snow with his hands. I sat perfectly still in the darkness just 10 feet away from him. I could see the outline of his face pressed against the pane. I could see the terror in his eyes. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad. Are you in there?" He banged on the glass with the flat of his hand. The sound vibrated through the room, a dull, rhythmic thudding. "Dad, wake up, it's us. We're home." The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. He thought this was his home. He thought he had a right to this warmth. He moved to the dining room window. The blinds there were open. He looked in, and then he froze. He stepped back, stumbling off the porch into a snowdrift. Vanessa, hobbling up the steps, grabbed his arm. "What? What is it? Did you see him?" Brandon shook his head slowly. He pointed at the window. "Look," he whispered. Vanessa moved to the window. She peered inside. I knew what she was seeing. She was seeing the empty dining room, the space where the $10,000 mahogany table used to sit, the walls where the art used to hang, the cabinet that used to hold the china. It was all gone. The room was stripped bare down to the baseboards. The moonlight filtering in through the back windows illuminated nothing but dust and floorboards. "Where is our stuff?" Vanessa shrieked. Her voice cracked high and shrill. "Where is my furniture? Where is the table?" She turned to Brandon, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. "Did you not pay the storage fee? Did they repossess it?" "What did you do, Brandon?" "I didn't do anything," Brandon yelled, pushing her away. "I don't know, it looks like he moved out." "Moved out?" Vanessa looked around wildly. "He can't move out. This is his house, we live here." They ran around to the back of the house. I switched cameras again. They were trying the patio doors, locked. They peered into the kitchen, empty. The counters were cleared. The coffee maker was gone. The bar stools were gone. The only thing remaining was the refrigerator and the stove. "We've been robbed," Brandon said, his voice trembling. "That's it. Someone broke in while we were gone. They cleared the place out." "Robbed," Vanessa scoffed. "Who robs a house and takes the curtains?" "Brandon, who robs a house and installs new locks. This isn't a robbery. This is an eviction." She ran back to the front door. She began to pound on it with both fists. She wasn't knocking anymore. She was attacking the wood. "Gordon, I know you are in there. Open this door. I have your grandchildren out here. They are freezing to death. Open the door, or I swear to God I will break this window." I sat in my chair, unmoving. I took another sip of wine. I looked at the temperature gauge on my own phone. It was 19 degrees outside. Wind chill made it feel like 8. I wasn't worried about the grandchildren freezing. Not really. I knew Brandon. I knew Vanessa. They were survivors in the most parasitic sense. They wouldn't let themselves freeze. But they needed to feel this. They needed to feel the absolute biting reality of the world without my protection. They needed to understand that the warmth they had taken for granted was not a natural right. It was a gift they had squandered. Brandon joined her at the door. He was crying now. Great heaving sobs that shook his large frame. "Dad, please," he wailed. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the money. I'm sorry about the trip. Just let us in. We have nowhere to go. Our cards don't work. We don't have cash, Dad." His voice was a mixture of grief and entitlement. He was sorry, yes. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry the credit card didn't work. He was sorry he was cold. But was he sorry for plotting to lock me in a basement? Was he sorry for trying to steal my life's work? No. He was just cold. I stood up. My joints popped. I walked quietly to the hallway. I stood on the other side of the door. I was inches away from them. I could hear their teeth chattering. I could hear the baby whimpering a low, exhausted sound. I placed my hand on the wood. I could feel the vibrations of their pounding. I didn't unlock it. Instead, I leaned close to the doorframe where the newly installed Ring camera speaker was mounted. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. I pressed the microphone button. My voice boomed out onto the porch, distorted slightly by the speaker loud and cutting through the wind. "This is private property," I said. My voice was calm, flat, devoid of any paternal warmth. "You are trespassing." The pounding stopped instantly. Silence fell over the porch. They looked up at the camera, their faces illuminated by the infrared light. They looked like deer caught in headlights. Dad, Brandon whispered. Dad, open the door. "It's me. It's Brandon." "I know who you are," I said into the phone. "You are the man who authorized a contractor to turn my basement into a cell. You are the man who spent my retirement savings on a vacation while I ate leftovers." Brandon's face crumbled. He looked at Vanessa. She looked terrified. "Gordon," Vanessa pleaded, her voice shaking. "We didn't mean it. It was just talk. We were venting. Please, it's freezing. Just let us in for the night. We can talk in the morning." "There is nothing to talk about," I said. "The house is empty. Your possessions have been removed. Your residency has been terminated." "Terminated," Brandon shouted. "You can't do that. I have rights. I have tenants' rights." "You have never paid rent in your life, Brandon," I replied. "You are a guest, and guests can be asked to leave, especially guests who steal." I watched on the screen as Brandon's face shifted from fear to anger. The entitlement was fighting its way back to the surface. "You can't leave us out here," he screamed, kicking the door. "This is illegal. I'll call the cops. I'll tell them you're senile. I'll tell them you're endangering children." "Go ahead," I said. "Call them. I have the receipts, Brandon. I have the notebook. I have the logs of every dollar you stole. Call the police. I would love to show them the evidence of your conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud." Brandon froze. The mention of the notebook hit him like a physical blow. He looked at Vanessa. She put her hand over her mouth. She knew. She realized in that second that I hadn't just found out about the money. I had found the diary. I knew the whole plan. The wind howled around them, whipping snow into their faces. They stood there, defeated, realizing that the door was not going to open. The warmth was denied. The bank of Dad was closed forever. "The police are already on their way," I lied. Or maybe I wasn't lying. Maybe neighbors had called. I didn't care. "I suggest you find shelter before they arrive. Motel 6 is 5 miles down the road. They take cash." "But we don't have cash," Vanessa screamed. "We spent it on the taxi." I paused. I let the silence stretch. "Check the mailbox," I said. Brandon ran to the mailbox at the end of the porch. He ripped it open. Inside was a white business envelope. He tore it open. Inside was a stack of $20 bills. $300. "That is the proceeds from the sale of your Gucci handbags, Vanessa," I said through the speaker. "It should cover 2 nights at the motel and a hot meal. Consider it my final gift." Brandon stared at the money. He looked back at the camera. His face was a mask of shock and hatred. "I hate you," he whispered. I didn't respond. I turned off the microphone. I closed the app. I walked back to the living room and sat down. I watched the monitor. I saw them arguing. I saw Vanessa snatch the money from Brandon's hand. I saw them drag their suitcases back down the icy steps, slipping and cursing. They walked down the long driveway into the darkness, the snow swallowing their figures. They looked small. They looked insignificant. I took a deep breath. The air in the house was cold, but my chest felt light. The parasite had been detached. The wound would bleed for a while, but it would heal. I watched until they were out of sight, until the street was empty again. Then I turned off the monitor. I was alone in the dark, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt completely safe in my own home. The blue and red lights of the police cruiser cut through the falling snow, painting the white lawn in violent alternating strobes of color. I sat in my armchair by the window, swirling the last dregs of the Bordeaux in my glass, watching the silent theater unfolding in my driveway. Vanessa had made good on her threat. She stood by the hood of the patrol car, her arms waving frantically, pointing a manicured finger at my front door. She was performing the role of her life, the terrified mother, protecting her children from a madman. Beside her, Brandon looked less convinced, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if searching for a hole to crawl into. I did not panic. I did not rush to hide the wine or put on a pitiful face. I simply picked up the manila folder that had been sitting on the floor next to me for 5 days. It was labeled Property Records and Residency Status. I had prepared this file the same day I called the movers. In my line of work, you do not go into a negotiation without documentation, and you certainly do not go into a war without ammunition. A heavy knock rattled the front door. It was authoritative, distinct from Brandon's desperate pounding earlier. This was the knock of the law. I stood up, tightened the belt of my robe, and walked to the hallway. I unlocked the deadbolt with a calm, deliberate click. I opened the door. 2 officers stood on the porch. The older one, a sergeant with a graying mustache and a name tag that read. Miller looked from me to the shivering family behind him, then back to me. His expression was weary. It was Thanksgiving week. He clearly wanted to be home eating leftovers, not mediating a domestic dispute in an upscale neighborhood. Sir, are you Gordon Mitchell? Officer Miller asked. I am, I replied. My voice was steady. We received a call from a Mrs. Vanessa Mitchell claiming illegal eviction, child endangerment, and distinct mental instability on your part. She claims you have locked your family out of their home in freezing temperatures. I looked past him. Vanessa was watching, a triumphant sneer beginning to form on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the badge would intimidate me into submission. Officer, I said, stepping back to allow him a view of the interior. I have not evicted anyone. You cannot evict people who do not live here. And as for mental instability, I assure you I am quite lucid. Please come in. Just you. Miller signaled his partner to stay with Brandon and Vanessa. He stepped over the threshold. He stopped immediately, his eyes widening as he took in the empty expanse of the living room. The hardwood floors were bare. The walls were stripped. The echo of our footsteps was sharp and hollow. You're moving? Miller asked, confused. No, I said. I am simplifying. I sold the furniture. It was mine to sell. I walked to the kitchen island, the only piece of furniture that couldn't be removed because it was bolted to the floor. I placed the manila folder on the granite surface. Miller followed me. Officer, my son and his wife seem to be under the impression that this is their house. They believe they have tenants' rights. I am afraid they are mistaken. I opened the folder. The first document was the deed of trust. This is the deed, I said, tapping the paper. The house is owned solely by the Gordon Mitchell Revocable Trust. I am the sole trustee. Brandon's name is nowhere on this document. Miller glanced at it. Okay, but if they have been living here for more than 30 days in Rhode Island, they establish residency. You still have to go through the courts to evict them. You can't just change the locks. I smiled. It was a thin, cold smile. That would be true, officer, if they were tenants. But they are not. They are guests. And they signed a document attesting to that fact 3 years ago, when they begged to move in after Brandon's bankruptcy. I pulled out the second document. It was a guest occupancy agreement. I had drafted it myself, and I had Blackwood refine it. When Brandon moved in, I told him it was a formality for my homeowner's insurance policy to ensure that if anyone got hurt, the insurance would cover it. He had signed it without reading it. Vanessa had signed it because she was too busy looking at paint swatches. Paragraph 4. I said, pointing to the highlighted section. The occupants acknowledge they are guests of the owner. No rent is exchanged. No tenancy is established. The owner retains the right to revoke guest privileges at any time for any reason immediately and without notice. Specifically, Clause 4.2 states that any theft, misuse of funds, or abandonment of the property for more than 7 days without the owner's consent constitutes an immediate forfeiture of guest status. Miller leaned in. He put on his reading glasses. He read the clause. He looked at the signature at the bottom. Brandon Mitchell. Vanessa Mitchell. They abandoned the property. I continued. They left for a 10-day vacation to the Maldives without my consent using stolen funds. Stolen funds, Miller asked, looking up. I turned the page. I showed him the credit card statement. I showed him the transaction logs. I showed him the text messages where Brandon admitted to using the card. $18,000, I said. That is grand larceny, officer. I have not pressed charges yet because he is my son. But I am fully prepared to do so if they do not leave my property immediately. Miller let out a long, low whistle. He looked at the empty kitchen. He looked at me. He saw a man who was not crazy, not senile, but methodical. He saw a man who had been pushed too far. So let me get this straight, Miller said, closing the folder. They stole 18 grand, went on a luxury vacation, came back, and are now demanding. You let them back in after you revoked their guest privileges, succinctly put, I said. Miller shook his head. He looked tired, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. He picked up his radio. Davis, bring Mr. Mitchell to the door. Just him. A moment later, Brandon appeared in the doorway, flanked by the younger officer. He looked hopeful. He saw the police inside and assumed order was being restored. Dad, Brandon started stepping in. Thank God. Look, tell them it's a misunderstanding. We just want to go to bed. Miller held up a hand. Stop right there, son. Brandon froze. Mr. Mitchell, Miller said, gesturing to the folder. Your father has provided documentation proving that you are not a tenant. You signed a guest agreement. You have no legal right to be here. Furthermore, he has shown me evidence of substantial financial theft. Brandon's face went white. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like he might faint. He looked at the folder on the counter. He recognized the guest agreement. But that was just for insurance, Brandon stammered. That's not real. It is a signed legal contract, Miller said firmly, and coupled with the credit card theft. You are walking a very thin line, son. Your father is within his rights to ask you to leave. In fact, if you refuse, he is within his rights to press charges for criminal trespass and larceny. Vanessa appeared in the doorway behind Brandon. She pushed past the officer. This is bullshit, she screamed. We have rights. We have kids. You can't kick kids out in the snow. Ma'am, step back, Miller warned, his hand dropping to his belt. You are monsters, she shrieked, looking from me to the officer. He's senile. He forged that. He's lying. I looked at her. I didn't raise my voice. Vanessa, I said, I suggest you stop screaming before I show Officer Miller the photos of your journal. The one where you detail your plan to poison me with medication. Vanessa stopped. Her mouth snapped shut. Her eyes went wide with pure terror. The air left her lungs in a sharp hiss. She knew. She realized that I had seen everything. The basement, the pills, the penthouse. She grabbed Brandon's arm. Let's go, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. Brandon, let's go, now. Brandon looked at her, confused by her sudden retreat. But where? We don't have money. I spoke up then. My voice carried across the empty room. I already told you where the money is, Brandon. I pointed toward the front door, toward the mailbox at the end of the driveway. There is an envelope in the mailbox. $300. That is the cash value of the handbags Vanessa left behind. It will get you a room at the Motel 6. It will buy you breakfast. After that, you are on your own. Brandon looked at me. His eyes were filling with tears. Dad, please, don't do this. I am not doing this. Brandon, I said, you did this. You did this when you stole from me. You did this when you left me alone on Thanksgiving. You did this when you decided I was nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. Officer Miller stepped between us. He placed a hand on Brandon's shoulder. It's time to go, folks. You have been trespassed. If you return to this property, you will be arrested. Do you understand? Brandon nodded, defeated. His shoulders slumped. The entitlement had finally broken, shattered against the wall of legal reality. They turned around. Vanessa was already half running down the driveway, dragging the children, desperate to get away from the evidence of her own malice. Brandon lingered for a second, looking back at the warm, empty house he had lost. Then he turned and followed her. I watched them go. I watched Brandon stop at the mailbox. I watched him reach in and pull out the white envelope. He clutched it like a lifeline. It was the last handout he would ever receive from me. Officer Miller turned to me. He tipped his cap. Good luck, Mr. Mitchell. Stay warm. Thank you, officer, I said. He walked out and closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I walked to the window and watched the cruiser pull away. I watched Brandon and Vanessa walking down the street, their suitcases dragging in the snow, heading toward the main road to flag down a taxi they could finally afford with my $300. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. It was heavier than that. It was the satisfaction of a ledger balanced. The debt had been called in. The assets had been protected. I went back to my chair. I picked up my wine. It was finished. I stood in the darkness of my reclaimed fortress. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. The house was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt the heat of victory. I had faced the people who wanted to bury me, and I had buried them instead under the weight of their own greed. Tomorrow I would go to the lawyer's office. Tomorrow the real legal war would begin. But for tonight, the battle was over. The enemy had been routed, and I was the last man standing. The morning sun reflected off the glass facade of the Blackwood and Associates building in downtown Providence, blinding anyone foolish enough to look directly at it. It was the kind of building that screamed power, the kind of place where fortunes were protected and lives were dismantled with the stroke of a pen. At 9 o'clock sharp, my son Brandon and his wife Vanessa marched through the revolving doors. They looked like refugees from a failed glamping trip. Brandon was wearing the same wrinkled linen suit he had worn on the plane, now stained with coffee and sweat. Vanessa was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes, clutching her fake Birkin bag, as if it contained the nuclear codes. They walked with a desperate, aggressive energy, the false confidence of people who believe that being loud is the same thing as being right. They approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she judged people for a living, didn't even look up from her screen until Brandon slammed his hand on the marble counter. I demand to see Mr. Blackwood. Brandon announced, his voice cracking slightly. We have an appointment, or rather we have a summons, and I have a lawsuit to file against his client. The receptionist looked at them over the rim of her glasses. She pressed a button on her phone. Mr. Mitchell is here, she said. Her tone suggested she was announcing the arrival of a pest control problem. She pointed toward the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. Conference room B. I wasn't in the room. I was sitting in my car 2 blocks away watching the entrance, waiting for the text from Blackwood. But I knew exactly what was happening inside. We had rehearsed it. I had given Blackwood the ammunition, and he was the sniper. Brandon and Vanessa burst into the conference room. Mr. Blackwood was sitting at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer them coffee. He didn't smile. He just sat there, steepled his fingers, and watched them enter. Blackwood was a man who charged $800 an hour to destroy people, and he was worth every penny. "Sit down," Blackwood said. It wasn't a request. "We will stand," Brandon retorted, trying to assert dominance. "Listen to me. You represent my father, Gordon Mitchell. Last night, he illegally locked us out of our primary residence. He endangered my children. He stole our property. We are here to demand immediate re-entry and to file a civil suit for emotional distress and illegal eviction. I want $2 million in damages, and I want him committed for a psychiatric evaluation. He has clearly lost his mind." Vanessa chimed in, her voice shrill. "And I want my furniture back. He sold my custom Italian sofa. That is theft." Blackwood let them rant. He sat in silence, his face unreadable as they poured out their grievances, their lies, and their entitlement. He waited until Brandon ran out of breath, until the silence in the room stretched thin and tight like a rubber band about to snap. "Are you finished?" Blackwood asked quietly. Brandon huffed, crossing his arms. "For now. We expect a settlement offer by the end of the day." Blackwood reached down and picked up a thick black binder that had been sitting on the floor. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the room. It sounded like a cell door slamming shut. "We are not here to discuss your eviction," Mr. Mitchell, Blackwood said. "You are not tenants. You are guests who have worn out your welcome. The police have already clarified that matter." "Then why are we here?" Brandon demanded. "We are here," Blackwood said, opening the binder, "to discuss the Mitchell Family Preservation Trust." The color drained from Brandon's face instantly. It was as if someone had pulled a plug in his heel. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vanessa looked confused. "What trust? What is he talking about?" Brandon Blackwood ignored her. He looked directly at my son. "5 years ago, your father established a revocable trust designated for the maintenance and repair of the Newport estate. He deposited $200,000 into that account. He made you the trustee, Brandon. He wanted to give you a sense of responsibility. He wanted to see if you could manage a simple fund to fix the roof, repair the boiler, and maintain the grounds. It was a test." Brandon was sweating now, profuse visible beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. I managed it," he stammered. "I fixed the driveway. I painted the fence." Blackwood turned a page in the binder. He pulled out a spreadsheet. It was color-coded. It was detailed. It was lethal. According to the forensic accounting report I received this morning, Blackwood read, his voice devoid of emotion. "The current balance of the trust is $4.12. Vanessa gasped. $200,000? Where is it? Blackwood pulled out another sheet. Here is where it gets interesting. On June 4th, $12,000 was withdrawn. The memo says roof repair. However, we checked the contractor's invoice. It was forged. The money was actually wired to a dealership for the lease down payment on a BMW X5. Vanessa looked at Brandon. Her eyes were wide. You told me your company paid for the car lease, Blackwood continued, relentless. On August 15th, $8,000. Memo boiler replacement. Actual destination, the account of Van Cleef and Arpels. Purchase 1 vintage Alhambra necklace. Vanessa's hand flew to her neck. She was wearing that necklace right now. She had told her friends it was an anniversary gift from Brandon's big commission. She looked at the gold clover hanging around her neck as if it were burning her skin. November 1st, Blackwood said. $5,000. Memo tree removal. Actual destination Delta Airlines. Upgrade to business class for 4 passengers. He closed the binder. He looked at Brandon, who had collapsed into the chair he had refused to sit in earlier. Brandon was shaking. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the collection plate. "This is not a misunderstanding," Mr. Mitchell Blackwood said. "This is embezzlement. This is wire fraud. This is a fiduciary breach of the highest order. Your father has given me instructions to file criminal charges with the district attorney's office." "Criminal charges!" Vanessa shrieked. She turned on Brandon, hitting him on the arm. "You stole from your father. You told me we had money. You told me you were closing deals. I was going to pay it back," Brandon cried, tears streaming down his face. "It was a loan I just needed to float us until the market turned. I didn't steal it." "You forged invoices," Blackwood said. "That proves intent. That proves malice. In the eyes of the law, you are not a son borrowing money. You are a thief who systematically looted a protected trust fund. The penalty for this amount of theft is up to 15 years in prison." The word prison hung in the air. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. Brandon put his head in his hands and began to sob. It wasn't the dignified crying of a man who made a mistake. It was the ugly, snotty crying of a coward who realizes the game is over. "Please," Brandon wailed. "Please don't put me in jail. I have kids. I can't go to jail. Dad wouldn't do that. He loves me." Blackwood leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Your father loved the son he thought he had. But that son didn't exist. That son was a mask you wore while you robbed him blind. Your father is a man of principle, Brandon, and you have violated every single one of them." Vanessa stood up. She backed away from the table, away from Brandon. "I didn't know," she said to Blackwood. "I swear I didn't know. He told me it was his money. He told me he was successful. I am a victim here." Blackwood looked at her with cold amusement. "Are you?" "Because according to your journal, which Mr. Chateau Mitchell also provided, you were actively planning to liquidate his antique watch collection. That makes you a co-conspirator in a conspiracy to commit grand larceny. If Brandon goes down, Mrs. Mitchell, you are going down right next to him. Who will raise your children then?" "Foster?" "Care." Vanessa froze. She looked at the door. She looked at Brandon. She looked at the binder. She realized there was no exit. There was no spinning this. She sat down next to her husband and stared at the table, defeated. So Blackwood said, leaning back in his chair, "Here is the situation. My client is willing to offer you a deal, a lifeline. But it is a very thin rope, and it is the only one you are going to get." "What is it?" Brandon asked, lifting his head. His eyes were red, his face blotchy. "I'll do anything." "Option A," Blackwood said. "I hand this binder to the police. You are arrested before lunch. Your children are placed in protective custody. You go to trial. You lose. You go to prison. Option B," he continued. "You sign a confession. You admit to the theft. You agree to a repayment plan. Every cent you earn after basic living expenses goes back to the trust until the debt is paid in full. You surrender any claim to the house. You surrender any claim to future inheritance. And you agree to a complete no-contact order with Gordon Mitchell until the debt is paid." Brandon nodded frantically. "Option B. I'll take option B. I'll sign whatever. Just don't call the police." Vanessa looked at him with disgust. "You are going to sign away our inheritance." "There is no inheritance," Brandon screamed at her. "Don't you get it? It's gone. We spent it. We ate it. We wore it. It's gone." Blackwood pushed a document across the table. It was thick. It was comprehensive. "Sign," Blackwood said. Brandon grabbed a pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed his name. He didn't read a single word. He just signed his life away to stay out of a cage. Vanessa signed too, her hand trembling with rage. She knew her dream of the Miami penthouse was dead. She knew her life of luxury was over. She was now the wife of a man with a mountain of debt and no prospects. Blackwood took the document back. He checked the signatures. He nodded. "One more thing," Blackwood said. "Mr. Mitchell Sr. wants you to know something." What Brandon whispered. "He wants you to know that the watch collection you were planning to sell, they are replicas. He sold the real ones 10 years ago to start the college fund for your children. A fund that is now in a blind trust that you cannot touch." Brandon stared at him. The realization hit him. He had been plotting to steal glass and steel, thinking it was gold. "Get out of my office," Blackwood said, returning to his paperwork. "And get a job. You have a payment due on the 1st of the month." They walked out of the office in silence. They didn't look like the arrogant couple that had marched in. They looked like people who had just survived a car crash. They walked out into the cold. Providence Street broke homeless and indebted to a man they had underestimated for their entire lives. From my car, I watched them leave. I saw the slump in Brandon's shoulders. I saw the distance between him and Vanessa. They weren't walking together anymore. They were walking parallel, separated by blame and resentment. I started the engine. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The anger was gone. The betrayal was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but the immediate threat was neutralized. I had protected what was mine. I had protected my grandchildren's future from their parents' greed. I put the car in drive. I had one more stop to make. I had to go to the bank. I had a check to write for a local charity. After all, I had saved a lot of money on groceries this week. The meeting was not over. They thought it was. They thought that by signing the confession and agreeing to the repayment plan, they had bought their way out of the room. They stood up, their legs shaky, ready to flee the scene of their humiliation. Brandon reached for the door handle, desperate for fresh air. "Sit back down," Mr. Blackwood said. His voice was not loud, but it had the weight of an anchor dropping into the sea. Brandon froze. He looked back at the lawyer. "We signed the papers," he said, his voice trembling. "You said we could go. I said you could go after we concluded our business." Blackwood corrected, adjusting his cufflinks. "We have dealt with the financial crimes. Now we must address the issue of safety, specifically the safety of my client." Vanessa looked nervous. She clutched her fake Birkin bag tighter. "What safety? He is fine. He is sitting in his empty house drinking wine. We are the ones who are homeless." Blackwood did not answer her. He picked up a remote control from the table. He pressed a button. The motorized blinds on the windows lowered with a soft whirring sound, plunging the room into a twilight gloom. A large projection screen descended from the ceiling at the far end of the conference room. "Please look at the screen," Blackwood instructed. The projector hummed to life. A bright image filled the wall. It was a high-resolution photograph of a pink leather-bound notebook. Vanessa let out a strangled sound, like a cat being stepped on. She recognized it instantly. It was her manifestation journal, the one she kept under her pillow, the one she thought was safe in the sanctuary of the master bedroom I had foolishly allowed them to occupy. This, Blackwood narrated, his laser pointer dancing over the image, is a document recovered from the master bedroom of the Newport estate. "It belongs to you, Mrs. Mitchell. That is private property," Vanessa shrieked, lunging toward the table. "You can't show that. That is illegal. You stole it." "It was left in a house you had abandoned," Blackwood said calmly. "And considering it outlines a conspiracy to commit bodily harm against a senior citizen, it is admissible evidence. Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell, or I will have security restrain you." Vanessa sank back into her chair. She looked at Brandon. Brandon was staring at the screen, confused. "It is just a diary," Brandon muttered. "Vanessa writes her goals in it. She wants to be a famous influencer." "Who cares?" "Read it," Brandon Blackwood said. "Read the entry dated October 15th. He clicked the remote. The slide changed. A blown-up image of a handwritten page appeared. The handwriting was bubbly, looped, and girlish. The content was anything but. October 15th. Gordon is still refusing to sell the watches. He is so stubborn. I hate him. I hate the way he chews. I hate the way he looks at me. He is useless space. Brandon is too weak to push him. I have to be the strong one. If we move him to the basement, the dampness will trigger his arthritis. He will be too much in pain to come upstairs. It is the only way to get our privacy back. Brandon read the words. His mouth opened slightly. He turned to Vanessa. You wrote that. You said you wanted to move him downstairs so he would have his own space. You said it was for his hobby room. Vanessa refused to look at him. She stared at the table, her face burning red. I was venting, she whispered. It is just venting. Everyone does it. Blackwood clicked the remote again. November 10th. The blood pressure medication. I looked it up. If we double the dose, he will get dizzy. He might fall. If he falls, he goes to the hospital. If he goes to the hospital, we can claim he is unsafe at home. We can put him in a home. Then the house is ours. Brandon won't notice. He never checks the pill bottles. He is too busy playing video games and pretending to work. I have to do everything. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a marriage disintegrating in real time. Brandon stared at the screen. He read the line about himself. Brandon is too weak. He never checks. You were going to drug him, Brandon whispered. His voice was hoarse. You were going to overdose my father. I did it for us, Vanessa screamed, suddenly finding her voice. She turned on him, her eyes wild. I did it for our future, Brandon. You weren't doing anything. You were sitting around waiting for him to die. You told me 100 times how much easier it would be if he was just gone. I never said. I wanted to kill him, Brandon shouted back, standing up. I never said I wanted to hurt him. I just wanted the money. There is a difference, Vanessa. Is there? Blackwood interjected smoothly. He clicked the remote again. November 23rd. Operation Freedom. The final entry. If he doesn't agree to the basement when we get back, we stop feeding him. We stop buying groceries. Let him starve a little. He has enough fat on him. We lock the fridge. He will break eventually. He is just an old dog that needs to be put down. Once he is gone, we buy the penthouse. We buy the boat. We live the life we deserve. Blackwood turned off the projector. The lights came back on, harsh and unforgiving. Put down, Blackwood repeated. Like a dog. He looked at Brandon. Your wife, Mr. Mitchell, was not just planning to steal. She was planning a slow, painful elimination of your father. And she viewed you not as a partner, but as a useful idiot. An obstacle she had to manage just as much as she had to manage Gordon. Brandon looked at Vanessa. He looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. He saw the greed etched into the lines around her mouth. He saw the coldness in her eyes that he had mistaken for ambition. He saw the monster she truly was. You are sick, Brandon said. He backed away from her, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You are actually sick. I thought we were just bending the rules. I thought we were just borrowing what was eventually going to be mine. But you wanted to torture him. Don't look at me like that, Vanessa spat, standing up to face him. Her mask had fallen completely now. There was no more sweet influencer charm. There was only the ugly rage of a cornered animal. You are pathetic, Brandon. You are a 40-year-old man who still lives on his daddy's allowance. You couldn't close a deal if your life depended on it. I had to do this. I had to plan. Someone had to be the adult. Brandon laughed. It was a broken, hysterical sound. You spent $18,000 on a vacation we couldn't afford. You bought handbags while I was begging him for tuition money. You aren't an adult, Vanessa. You are a leech, and you attached yourself to me because you thought I was a rich host. And you let me, she screamed, poking him in the chest. You loved the cars. You loved the suits. You didn't complain when I bought you that watch with the stolen money. You are just as guilty as I am. I may be a thief, Brandon said, his voice shaking with a newfound clarity. I may be a disappointment, but I am not a murderer, and I am not going to let you near my father again. He turned to Blackwood. I want a divorce, Brandon said. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. That is outside the scope of my representation, Mr. Mitchell. But given the evidence presented, I would say you have grounds. Vanessa gasped. You can't divorce me. We have nothing. We are in debt. You need me. I don't need you, Brandon said quietly. I need a lawyer, and I need to apologize to my father. He looked at Vanessa one last time. There was no love left in his eyes, only disgust. You wrote about me in that book, Brandon said. You wrote that I was weak. You were right. I was weak because I let you run my life. I let you turn me into this. But I am done. He turned and walked toward the door. He didn't wait for her. He didn't hold it open. He walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. Vanessa stood alone at the table. She looked at the blank screen where her secrets had been displayed. She looked at Blackwood, who was busy organizing his papers, dismissing her entirely. She grabbed her bag. She tried to muster some dignity, straightening her jacket, but her hands were shaking too hard. She looked small. She looked defeated. She walked out of the room, her heels clicking on the floor, echoing the hollowness of her victory. I watched them leave the building from my car. They came out of the revolving doors separately. Brandon walked left toward the subway station, his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, but he was walking under his own power. Vanessa walked right toward the taxi stand. She stood there looking around, waiting for a car. No one stopped. She checked her phone. She probably realized she didn't have enough money for a ride. She started walking, dragging her suitcase through the slush, her expensive shoes ruined by the salt and snow. I started the engine of my car. The heat blasted against my face. The alliance was broken. The toxicity had been severed. My son was broke, he was in legal trouble, and he was alone. But for the first time in years, he was free of her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way he could ever be free of. I pulled away from the curb. I had one more stop to make. The bank. I had a check to write for a local veterans charity. After all, I had saved a lot of money on groceries this week, and the heating bill was going to be delightfully low. The war was over. The cleanup could begin. You thought it was over. You thought that because you signed a confession for the embezzlement and walked out of that conference room, you had survived the worst of the storm. You thought you could walk away, divorce your wife, get a cheap apartment, and slowly pay back the $200,000 over the next 20 years. You were wrong. The trust fund was just the appetizer. The main course was still waiting on the table, and it was a dish I had been marinating for 5 years. I stepped out of the elevator just as Brandon was reaching for the exit door of the lobby. He stopped when he saw me. He looked like a man who had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. His tie was loose, his eyes were swollen, and his posture was broken. Vanessa was a few feet behind him, trailing like a ghost, her face a mask of shock. They froze. The lobby of the Blackwood building was cavernous, filled with the echo of footsteps and the low hum of commerce. But in that moment, the only thing that existed was the three of us. Dad, Brandon whispered. It was a reflex. A child calling for a parent. I did what the lawyer said. I signed. I'm going. I did not move out of his way. I stood in the center of the marble floor, blocking his path to the street, blocking his path to his new, mediocre life. I held a single blue document folder in my hand. It was thinner than the binder Blackwood had used, but it was infinitely heavier. You forgot something, I said. My voice was low, carrying effortlessly across the space. You forgot about the seed money. Brandon frowned. He looked confused. The seed money? You mean the investment for Prestige Realty? I walked forward. I forced him to step back. Vanessa stopped moving entirely, sensing a new predator entering the water. It was not an investment. Brandon, I corrected him. Investors buy equity. Investors take a risk. I did not buy equity in your company because I knew your business plan was a fantasy written in crayon. I gave you a loan, a personal, unsecured business loan. I opened the blue folder. I pulled out a document. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges. It was dated 5 years ago. Do you recognize this? I asked, holding it up. Brandon squinted. That's the promissory note. Read the header, I commanded. Promissory note. Principal amount $450,000. Interest rate 4% compounded annually. Balloon payment. Due date November 30th of this year. Brandon stared at the date. November 30th. That was yesterday, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon's mouth worked, but no words came out. He looked at the paper, then at me, then at the ceiling as if looking for an escape hatch. But that was for the business, Brandon stammered. The business failed, Dad. The market crashed. I lost it. It's gone. You can't collect on a failed business. That's the risk of business, I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb that had wandered away from the flock. If you had used the money for the business, Brandon, you might be right. If you had spent it on marketing, on office space, on lead generation, and failed honestly, I might have written it off as a loss. I might have forgiven the debt. I pulled a second sheet of paper from the folder. It was another report from the forensic accountant. But you didn't spend it on the business, did you? I asked. I started reading from the list. January 2020. $50,000. Destination Mercedes-Benz of Warwick. Down payment on 2 G-Wagons. One for you. One for Vanessa. Vanessa flinched. She looked at her feet. March 2020. $30,000. Destination Soho House membership and initiation fees. July 2020. $20,000. Destination the Hermes Boutique in Paris. I looked at Brandon. You didn't lose the money in the market. You didn't lose it to bad leads or a housing crash. You ate it. You drove it. You wore it. You used a business loan to fund a millionaire's lifestyle for a blogger who has never made a profit in her life. This is not a business loss, I said, my voice hardening into steel. This is fraud. And because you used the funds for personal enrichment, the corporate veil is pierced. You are personally liable. Brandon shook his head frantically. I don't have $450,000. You know I don't. You just took the trust money. I have nothing. I know, I said. I know exactly what you have. You have a checking account with $300 in it. You have a 401k you tried to cash out last week, but couldn't because of the penalties. Vanessa stepped forward. Her voice was shrill, desperate. You can't get blood from a stone, Gordon. If we don't have it, we don't have it. Sue us. We'll declare bankruptcy. We'll wipe it clean. I turned my gaze to her. She recoiled as if I had raised a hand. You can try, Vanessa, I said, but bankruptcy courts frown upon fraud, and Mr. Blackwood has already filed a motion to attach your future earnings. But that isn't the point. I don't want to sue you for money you don't have. Then what do you want? Brandon cried. He dropped to his knees. Right there in the lobby. He fell to the cold marble floor, his suit pants straining, his hands clasped together. It was a pathetic, broken gesture. Please, Dad. What do you want? I have nothing left to give you. I am begging you. Let me go. people were watching. Security guards were looking over. Businessmen in suits were pausing to stare at the man begging on the floor. I didn't care. Let them watch. This was the final lesson. I looked down at my son. I saw the top of his head where his hair was starting to thin. I remembered holding him when he was born. I remembered thinking I would do anything to protect him. And I realized that protecting him was exactly what had destroyed him. I want you to understand, I said quietly. I want you to feel the weight of the world without my hand holding it up. I closed the folder. The acceleration clause in the note has been triggered, I stated. The full amount is due immediately. Since you cannot pay, the default judgment has already been filed. I leaned down, bringing my face close to his. You are going to get 2 jobs, Brandon. Not a real estate gig where you play pretend. Real jobs. You are going to work days. You are going to work nights. And every single paycheck will be garnished. 25%. For the rest of your life or until this debt is paid. Brandon sobbed. It was a guttural, wet sound. And you, I said, looking at Vanessa without straightening up. You are liable too. Your name is on the credit cards that paid for the gas in those G-Wagons. You are a co-signatory on the lifestyle. You will work. You will sweat. And you will never see the inside of a penthouse again. Vanessa collapsed. She didn't fall gracefully like a heroine in a movie. She slid down the wall, her legs giving out, her face buried in her hands. She wailed a sound of pure mourning for the life she had felt entitled to. I stood up. I straightened my coat. The air in the lobby felt cleaner. The debt had been acknowledged. The terms had been set. Dad, Brandon whispered from the floor. He reached out a hand to grab my pant leg. I stepped back out of his reach. My name is Gordon, I said. You lost the right to call me Dad when you decided to treat me like a bank vault. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the exit doors. I didn't look back at the man kneeling on the floor or the woman crying against the wall. They were no longer my problem. They were just 2 people who owed a lot of money to a very patient creditor. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the cold, bright morning. The wind hit my face sharp and invigorating. I took a deep breath. I felt light. I felt unburdened. The parasites were gone. The accounts were balanced. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. I had a lunch reservation at a small Italian place by the harbor. I was going to order a bottle of wine. I was going to eat alone. And it was going to be the best meal of my life. The sold sign went up on the lawn on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, it was gone. In Newport, real estate moves fast when the price is right, and the seller is motivated by something stronger than profit. I didn't haggle. I didn't wait for a bidding war. A young couple from Boston, an architect and a surgeon, walked in, fell in love with the bones of the house, and made a cash offer. They saw a future there. I only saw a past I was ready to bulldoze. I signed the papers on the kitchen island, the same granite slab where I had found that pink sticky note just weeks before. When I handed over the keys, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders, as if I had been carrying the house on my back for years. I walked out with a single suitcase and the check for the equity. I didn't look back at the windows. I didn't wave goodbye to the ghosts. I simply got in my car and drove away from the cul-de-sac forever. The dismantling of Vanessa's digital empire was not something I had to orchestrate. I simply provided the match, and the internet provided the gasoline. After the eviction, she tried to spin the narrative. She posted a tearful video on Instagram filtered to perfection, claiming she and her children had been thrown into the snow by an abusive, senile father-in-law. She set up a GoFundMe page asking for donations to help a homeless mother start over. For about 6 hours, she received sympathy. People commented with heart emojis and angry faces. They called me a monster. Then the truth began to leak. I didn't post it myself. I simply allowed Mr. Blackwood to release a statement to a local journalist who had been sniffing around the police report. The article was short, factual, and devastating. It detailed the embezzlement. It mentioned the $18,000 dinner in the Maldives while claiming poverty. It referenced the journal entries about the basement. The internet detectives did the rest. They found the photos of the luxury trip she had tried to delete. They matched the dates of the stolen trust fund withdrawals to her unboxing videos of designer bags. The tide turned with the violence of a tsunami. The comments on her profile shifted from sympathy to outrage. Scammer began to trend in her local circle. Her follower count plummeted. Sponsors dropped her faster than a hot rock. She was exposed not just as a liar, but as a predator who had used her own children as props in a con game. She deactivated her accounts 3 days later. The silence she left behind was the only dignity she had left. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she moved back in with her parents in New Jersey, a fate she had once described as a fate worse than death. Brandon's fall was less public but infinitely more physical. The terms of our agreement were strict. 25% of his gross income was to be garnished until the debt was paid. That meant he couldn't hide money. That meant he couldn't work under the table. He needed a payroll job, and he needed it immediately. The luxury real estate market didn't want him anymore. Word travels fast in this town, and nobody hires an agent who steals from his own family trust. I saw him once about 2 weeks after the confrontation in the lobby. I was stopped at a red light near the industrial district. A delivery truck was parked on the corner, its hazard lights blinking in the gray dawn. Brandon was jumping out of the back, wearing a neon vest over a heavy hoodie. He was carrying a crate of produce, his breath puffing in the cold air. He looked tired. He looked older. The soft edges of his face, nurtured by years of expensive dinners and leisure, were sharpening into the gaunt lines of exhaustion. He stumbled slightly under the weight of the crate, corrected himself, and marched into the back of a grocery store. He was working. For the first time in his life, he wasn't networking or strategizing or consulting. He was sweating. He was trading his time and his body for a paycheck that would barely cover his rent after I took my share. I didn't honk. I didn't roll down my window. I just watched him work for a light cycle. It wasn't satisfying in a cruel way. It was satisfying in the way a parent feels when a child finally learns that the stove is hot. He was learning the physics of the real world. Gravity is heavy, work is hard, and money is heavy to earn and light to spend. I drove to the bank. I had the check from the house sale in my pocket. It was a substantial sum, enough to buy a condo in the city and live comfortably for the rest of my life with plenty left over. But I didn't need plenty. I needed enough. I sat down with the branch manager. I told him I wanted to make a wire transfer. He looked at the amount and raised his eyebrows. "That is a very generous donation, Mr. Mitchell," he said. "It is not a donation," I corrected him. "It is an investment." I sent the money to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. It is an organization that helps young service members and their families when they hit hard times. It helps them buy food, pay rent, and keep the lights on when the world gets tough. It helps people who serve something bigger than themselves. I thought about the young men and women who would receive that help. They wouldn't know my name. They wouldn't send me thank you cards. They wouldn't try to lock me in a basement or steal my watch. They would just be able to feed their kids for another month. That was the legacy I wanted. That was where my money belonged. Not in a penthouse in Miami, but in the grocery carts of people who knew the meaning of duty. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than air. The accounts were closed. The ties were severed. The house was sold. I had stripped my life down to the studs, and I had found that the foundation was still strong. I had a suitcase in my trunk. I had a ticket in my pocket. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't have a schedule to keep. I drove to the airport. I didn't fly private. I didn't fly first class. I flew business because I am old, and my knees hurt, and I had earned the legroom. I sat in the lounge drinking a glass of water, watching the planes take off. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the court system. The garnishment order had been processed. The first payment from Brandon's wages had been deposited into my account. It was $212. It was a drop in the ocean compared to what he owed. It would take him 100 years to pay me back at this rate. But that didn't matter. The money wasn't the point. The point was that every 2 weeks when he looked at his pay stub, he would see my name. He would remember. He would know that I was still there, the silent partner in his life, teaching him the lesson he should have learned 20 years ago. I boarded the plane. I turned off my phone. I didn't check to see if Vanessa had reactivated her Instagram. I didn't check to see if Brandon had called. I didn't care. They were characters in a book I had finished reading. I closed the cover. I put it on the shelf. The plane taxied to the runway. The engines roared. I felt the pressure push me back into my seat. We lifted off, rising above the gray clouds of Rhode Island, punching through into the brilliant, blinding sunlight above. I looked down at the shrinking world below. Somewhere down there in a cheap apartment, my son was waking up to go to a job he hated. Somewhere down there, my ex-daughter-in-law was learning to live without an audience. And up here, I was flying toward Italy. I was going to learn how to make wine. I was going to eat pasta. I was going to sit in the sun and not worry about a single thing. I ordered a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. "To freedom," I whispered. The glass clinked against the tray table. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The war was over, and the peace was just beginning. The sun in Tuscany hits differently than it does in Rhode Island. Here it feels like it seeps into the stone walls and the soil's all warming everything from the inside out. In Newport, the sun just seemed to glare off the snow, cold and distant. I sat on the terrace of the small villa I was renting just outside of Florence. The valley below was a patchwork of vineyards and olive groves, a green and gold tapestry that stretched all the way to the horizon. I had spent the morning pruning vines with Marco, the owner of the estate. My hands were stained with earth and grape juice. They were the hands of a man who worked because he loved the labor, not because he feared the poverty. The postman arrived on his scooter, the engine buzzing like an angry hornet in the quiet afternoon. He waved at me and dropped a small stack of mail on the stone table. I walked over. It was mostly flyers for local markets and a utility bill, but at the bottom of the stack there was a postcard. It was a picture of the Newport Bridge. The colors were oversaturated, the blue of the water too bright, the white of the sails too crisp. I turned it over. The handwriting was familiar, though it looked less rushed than I remembered. It was smaller, more careful. "Dear Dad," it read. "I made the payment on the 1st. $500. I know it is not much, but I am working double shifts at the warehouse now. I am tired, Dad, but I am sleeping better. I just wanted to say, I am sorry. I was hungry then. I am still hungry now, but in a different way. I hope Italy is warm. Brandon." I read the words. I looked at the stamp. It had been canceled 3 weeks ago. It had traveled across the ocean to find me. I didn't feel a surge of fatherly instinct to call him. I didn't feel the urge to write a check. I felt a quiet, steady sense of closure. He was learning. He was struggling. And for the first time in his life, he was doing it on his own. That was the only gift I had left to give him. The dignity of his own struggle. I walked into the house. I went to the antique desk in the corner of the living room. I opened the top drawer. There were no other letters there. No legal documents. No foreclosure notices. Just a few dried lavender sprigs. I placed the postcard inside. I closed the drawer. I walked back out to the terrace. Marco was walking up the path carrying a bottle of the Chianti we had bottled last autumn. He saw me and raised the bottle, a silent invitation. I sat down. I looked out at the hills. I took a deep breath of the warm cypress-scented air. I had lost a son who wanted me dead, but I had found a version of him that might one day be worth knowing. I had lost a house that was a museum of my loneliness, and I had found a home that was alive with the seasons. Marco poured the wine. The liquid was ruby red, catching the light. "Salute Gordon," he said. "To life," I replied. I took a sip. It was simple. It was honest. It was everything I ever wanted. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, listening to the wind rustle through the olive trees. I was 73 years old. I was alone in a foreign country, and I had never been more at home. For 40 years, I believed that love meant endless sacrifice. I thought that if I gave enough, forgave enough, and provided enough, I would be valued. I was wrong. I learned that enabling is not love. It is a slow poison that destroys character. You cannot save people who view you only as a resource. True family is built on mutual respect, not biological obligation. Walking away was not an act of abandonment, but an act of self-preservation. I discovered that it is never too late to demand dignity, even if it means standing alone. If you believe that respect should never be compromised, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served.